Hey guys, I am getting back into making some videos, so I thought I'd start out with this game I'm in the middle of, a 15-10 game, and interesting opening here. This came from a Sicilian, and in a second I'll go over the moves that just preceded it. Um, and here my opponent played queen to f6, and this is one of those situations where I could play queen takes f6, but then knight takes f6, and then black would actually be ahead in development, and we don't want that. Instead, I think I can actually play e5 here, driving the queen away. The only thing I want to check, I want to make sure there's no nasty checks I need to worry about. It would give black the d5 square and the f5 square, so he could go something like knight to e5 to f5. But I think that we might be okay there in any case. You kind of have to give a little, as they say. If you want to get squares, you have to give squares, because we'll also have the d6 square, which could be quite nice. So I'm going to go with e5 here. And now that it is his turn, I'm going to show you real quick. This was a Sicilian knight to c6. I was expecting this Sveshnikov, but he plays e6 here. So sort of transposing into this type of opening. And after bishop to b4, I believe what I did was actually theory, which is knight takes c6, and then this queen to d4. And it's a nice position, targeting g7 as well as protecting the knight. So he takes back, and now I have this position where I have the two bishops, and we are back to the game here with queen to d8. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm a little rusty. I haven't really played any long games. I've been playing a little blitz here and there. I'm going to try to be very thoughtful about my game here. Now, again, I'm expecting something like knight to e7 with this maneuver here. And what I could actually do there is maybe pin him. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to play my bishop out yet, because, well, bishop to e3 was a thought with the idea of bishop to c5, but then his knight gets out. Instead, what I would like to do is wait and see if he tries to play that knight to e7, pin it. So now I'm thinking I want to castle my king, get it out to safety. So I want to move um, this bishop here. Trying to decide where to put it though. Bishop to d3 looks interesting. As does bishop to e2, with the idea of maybe a bishop to f3 at some point. Trying to think, those would be kind of the main moves. Um, Queen to g3, going after something like g7. I think is a little premature. He can even play like king to f8 at that point. Um, Bishop to e3, even though it would waste a move, considering my one thought. One idea behind that would be to play bishop to c5 and prevent him from castling on the king's side if he ever does play that maneuver here um, with this knight to e7. So that's actually another idea. Maybe even with the idea of castling queenside, and then that way I can decide what to do with the light square bishop. So those are my two options: whether to wait with the one or wait with the other. One reason why I'm hesitating on something like bishop to d3, which seems natural, is that um, it would block the d file, and I'm not sure if that's something I want to do. But maybe this is the case where I need to um, really just worry about getting my king to safety, because I do think I have a slight edge here in the opening. So let's not overthink it. Let's go ahead and play bishop to d3. Especially there's not really anything to calculate. If he plays knight to e7, I play bishop to g5. That is my idea with that. Okay, so here comes that knight to e7. I can somewhat play, and the reason I'm thinking about this too is that knight to g5, if he pushes it with, say, h6, I can take, and then my bishop would be superior to his. Although, at that point too, it might be a little, um, I'm not sure if my winning chances are that great, as opposed to keeping the two bishops here. So so another idea might actually be play something like knight to e4, with the idea is if he goes knight to d5, just take it. But um, this bishop is quite a bit better than his bishop. So So many decisions. This knight, though, I think we want to play bishop to g5. And again, this is a 15-10 game, so I don't want to spend too much time on these decisions and then end up at the end of this video in major time trouble. But my development, I'm ahead in development. Here he does play that h6 move. Um, and here we can just back up and maybe, just maybe, provoke the provoke g5. Now, if he does something like knight to d5 with the idea of trading queens, that's definitely something to consider. Not quite sure what I do there. Let's see. Knight to d5. Bishop takes d8. Knight takes c3. B takes c3. And then if he takes with the king, I think that would be okay. But actually, he plays this instead. So we're going to go ahead and back up this bishop. Now the e4 pawn is protected. But now his king side is maybe a little less safe. So, of course, my queen is being attacked. So we need to defend that. And does he want to castle queenside? I'm not sure. Queen to d4 looks attractive, covering f4, as well as b, as well as b4 here. And then if he tries some type of queen check, we have c3, and then we can castle. And again, that puts the queen in a nice spot where maybe I can go elsewhere. Now, queen to c5 is also an option. I don't think he's going to castle on this side because I think this becomes very unsafe. If he castles on this side, I could even consider castling queen side and then playing like h4 next. So I'm going to go with queen to d4 here. This little bind here on d6 I think is nice. Maybe I could have done something better with this bishop. It's going to be stuck here for a while. But I think, oh, well, considering the trade here, then I would have the two bishops here. Of course, he's attacking my pawn here too, so that's avoiding the trade might not be possible. Going into this endgame, I feel like I would be okay. I don't think it's that far superior. Now, let me see. Is there any way that I can... So queen takes b6 is my current candidate here. And the question is whether or not I can try to avoid the trade. Now, if I play something like, say, queen to c4, does that do anything positive for me? I think at that point, maybe he's just playing queen to b4 check and then trading anyway. So trading here will basically go into what I think should be a somewhat even endgame. And I think I should just do it. Again, all these decisions I want to analyze later and see if they were correct. Okay, so takes back with the b pawn, maybe looking to trade that bishop off. So what I think we might want to do here is, well, I'm going to play a3 here. This prevents anything like knight to b4 or any type of trade there. If he wants to play knight to f4, I will trade there. I think that would be good for me because looking at it comparatively, this bishop is superior to this one. Now, if he does play bishop to a6, I'm actually thinking bishop to e4 might be good. Because now my king is pretty safe in the center. I'm planning on maybe playing like king to d2 at some point. And our major imbalance here is this two bishops against his knight and his bishop. But this knight actually stands pretty well. Okay. Probably do not want to trade this bishop for that bishop. So I'm going to avoid it with bishop to... Well, let's double check here. Bishop to e4 Again, I don't think he doesn't want me to trade this knight, I would think. And I've been looking at these endgames. You would think that maybe the two bishops aren't as effective here with all of these pawns on the board, and that I think that is true to some extent. But I've been studying a bunch of endgames where it where the position will eventually open up, and then we'll have opportunities to exploit. Okay, so let's come up with some type of plan. What I'm thinking is playing f3 and then bishop to f2 to get a better um, scope for this bishop. And looking at what does black want to do, and I'm not exactly sure, to tell you the truth. One other idea here is to maybe start to put some pressure on this pawn, d7. Again, I don't want to take a ton of time here. All right, let's go ahead and let's play f3, and then that way we can start to bring this bishop around here. This knight, I think, will have a hard time getting back into the game, which is good. And then the decision is how to activate my rooks. I think if you play something like b4, b5, and so what I want to kind of do is sort of poke at the weak. Right now, this is the only weak pawn that he has because everything else is pretty protected. And then if he pushes it, I can play something like c3, and that'll prevent him from ever pushing anything there. And if he does push it, the c5 square is open for me. So at this point, it's really about improving what's on the board, improving my pieces. He's got this A file, but as long as I can keep him from making some type of breakthrough on b4 with his pawns, that should be pretty good. Or that should be sufficient for me. And that's where the two bishops are handy because they can, this dark square bishop can start to cover on both sides. You know, I can play it to c5, for example, if he tries to push b5 and b4. Try to decide whether I want a castle and have to get the rook onto the d file move faster while kind of keeping my king in the center, or something else. Because now moving my king to d2 doesn't make a lot of sense because I actually do want to occupy the d file here. But I don't know if I need to make that decision quite yet. I want to see what he does here, of course. There's still the option to castle kingside as well. So the one thing I have been doing, I've been busy with work and some other things. Okay, he's going to castle kingside, so that's interesting. Let's see here. So I think he definitely wants to push here. I think I'm going to castle queenside right now and start to put pressure on. I'm going to keep my bishop here for now because right now it's x-raying this d6 square. And I think what I'd like to do is actually try to get a rook to d6. And I mean, of course, he could put his knight on f8, but it's going to take a little while. So I'm going to go ahead and castle as well, not seeing any other immediate threats. And this is maybe for some of you this might be boring, but actually kind of been working on. That's one thing I was saying is I've been working on my endgame technique somewhat, studying some of the great endgame masters and trying to get better at that aspect of the game. Okay, so here I think he's looking to maybe play something like this, but now I think this gives me a little bit of an opportunity to um, wedge my rook here on d6. So rook to d6, and then maybe he plays. Now if he plays here, I could do is just take, perhaps. And then even though I have doubled pawns, this f pawn would be weakened. So the idea would be rook to d6, and then if bishop to b7, I do not exchange there. Instead, I take the pawn with rook takes b6. And then if he does exchange, I take back with the f pawn. And then even though I'd have these doubled pawns, we'd be covering some of these nice squares here. So that actually looks like a good idea with the idea of doubling. Now, if he plays something like knight to c6, then of course he's going to lose a pawn at that moment with bishop takes c6. So I think rook to takes d6 is good. Of course, if he tries to play knight to f5, I'm just going to take it and then take the b pawn. So I think we're in pretty good shape overall. In fact, I don't even have to take it. I could just take the b pawn, maybe threaten his bishop. I would say this endgame is probably not quite winning for white, but I definitely like my chances now. Okay, here comes that bishop, and here I think I can just take the b pawn, because again, you would think that maybe it would be not so great. Well, let me see. How do I want to do this? Rook takes b6, bishop takes e4, f takes e4, and then he has to deal with, still needs to deal with me somehow. This break here, the d pawn will not work. He can play something with the f pawn. But he has to be careful too, because there are some threats after that. So let's go ahead and take here. Partly because I'm low on time, I would want to calculate that a little further. Okay, so he's going to take there first, and I take back. And here as long as I haven't missed anything, I kind of like my position here. This rook is coming soon. Could actually come here to the f file as well. So now this is, yeah, a little problematic, I would say, for black. Okay. Um, this knight coming here might be slightly annoying, but and his idea maybe would be to come here. But I think I have time to. As long as I have a way to escape, then I think I'm okay here. So let's play rook. Well, let's see. Rook to d1, knight to d4. Do I have time to just play c3? If I play c3, what does he have? He does have a check here, I guess. So I could prevent that first with rook to d. I guess the question is, do I want to prevent that first with c3? C3, but then the c5, the third rank is well, you know what I can do? I could just play rook to b5, and now it becomes somewhat difficult for him to. Yeah, I don't think he can even defend it. He'd have to advance it, and then d4 no longer. Actually, I think that's a good move here. Kind of a simple move here. We're attacking this pawn. If he advances it, d4 is no longer available for black's pieces. And because of this bind here on d6, it actually becomes quite difficult for. It's going to become quite difficult to defend. Okay, so he attacks there. Now, again, I think I can just win this pawn by playing rook to c5, maybe, because there's really no way for him to defend it. So I'm just going to win another pawn. And now this guy's pinned. So playing a little fast, and again, later analysis might prove that there are better moves, but I kind of like this position. I'm going to be 2 pawns up, and he doesn't really have that much in terms of compensation for it. Again, these pawns have become quite nice in terms of being preventative for or restricting, I guess you could say. Okay, go ahead and take here, and I'm 2 pawns up. So this bishop's playing a great role here, preventing this break, and now I'm going to get my other rook into the game. And the question here is whether I should bring it in on the F file now. Okay, so this rook coming in, trying to challenge here, and might have a little tricky idea here. For example, if I play rook to d1 now, he takes. Oh no, it doesn't quite work, does it? I think I could play rook to d1 right now. And if he ever moves the knight, I always have this this rook check that gets me out of trouble. Okay, rook to d1. He might be. There was one thing I was seeing this with this rook here. We have to watch out for this pin, so definitely have to be careful there. Okay, I'm thinking now. Do I have time to make a kind of a prophylactic move like king to b1? My other thought now is playing here with the idea that I can go either way. I just love how this knight is really shutting down, or I'm sorry, these pawns are really shutting down this knight, and this bishop is okay. Okay, let's see here. Don't want to do anything foolish. He wants to double up here. I could see that that is the case. But I think this attack is going to actually come faster. He's going to have to retreat his rook, I think. And then worry, I could always drop back here to defend here. So what I'm trying to do in general in my games, as well as specifically with this game, is to always think of my opponent's threats and his possible counter chances or counterplay, as well as what I want to do. And in this case, just being able to pick at these weaknesses, I think is going to be good. Now, it's going to be hard to win any additional pawns right now because his rooks can defend pretty well. Although, can he defend pretty well? I can bring another one here. He actually has to bring his knight back. And then in which case, I swing back here with this rook. Or actually, I can win this pawn. Maybe. Let's see here. This is the part where it gets a little tricky, and I have to be careful not to spend too much time. Now, I do have to be careful here because he does have this thing swinging in potentially. So I think I'm going to take a move here and just play king to b1 because this threat is there. If I ever move this rook, that threat is still there. So I need to watch out for that. This actually gives him a chance to see. It gives me a chance to see what he's going to do next. Definitely think I'm winning here, but definitely something I can screw up, and the types of positions I have screwed up in the past. So um, I want to be careful with that. I want to play c3, but then that cuts off this rook's access over here. I don't know if I need that rook there over there though. So the next set of questions, or the next, I guess, objective is how am I going to actually win this game? Okay, so here, obviously, this is the threat, and I think what I have to do here is play this move. To give my bishop needs to stay protecting this pawn, of course. Some ideas I'm looking at are queen to d6, or I'm sorry, rook to d6, with the idea of just locking that pawn down and then giving me some access over here. But I don't think it's really necessary now because you really can't advance that pawn without any um, problems. I think at some point I'm going to need to start to push my pawns in order to have some type of winning chances here with this idea, and then bring my king up with it, because then, and this is something I observed with these Karpov games, is having the ability to um, open up a new front. So here, this king move is interesting, and I'm wondering, huh, can I go for um, this idea of advancing my pawns now? I think I will. And what this does is this rook can swing in behind. It's also protecting this pawn here, and there's a lot of threats that are in the works, I guess you could say. Okay, very interesting. Now here, what is the idea here? Well, let's go ahead. Let's see. He's starting to go here, which isn't really that big of a deal in my opinion. Let's go ahead and advance our king so we can swing our rook behind. Now I'm running low on time, so this could just be a play to. This could be some kind of play to cause me to lose on time, of course. But actually, this would be a bad move because then I think what I would do is just swing this guy around like that eventually. Okay, so that is, of course, interesting, but he has to be very careful now because I'm going to bring my rook here and make this threat. Now, of course, this knight is protecting that square, but this is where I can play this move and threaten to take it. So this king is eventually going to be trapped. Unless I'm missing something, which of course is possible as well. Okay. So I think I go to the next part, which is to just play this rook right here. And of course, there's a checkmate threat. So he can't move this. He can't move this knight without getting checkmated, unless he moves one of his rooks. Okay. So he could be looking for something like this. Could be looking for something like that. But I think it's a pretty easy. I think this is a pretty easy stop with c3. But let me double check. Rook to d6 is my other option here. I think I'm just going to play c3. Now, this is not protected at the moment, so that's something to remember too, because this pawn is pinned. So one thing to watch out for is sort of these double checks. Okay, he's going to bring that guy back over there. And so that means this pawn is not pinned anymore, which is good. And I think I'm going to play this rook to d6 now. Okay, so he's going back for that. And now that should be, I should be winning a piece. I think rook takes c6. And then if he takes back, then I'm checkmating him. So rook d takes c6, and this should be made in 2, or he's just losing a, because what he needs to do now is put a rook on the a file. Okay, and he does that, and so now we are up a piece, and here we can actually try to continue to increase our advantage with rook to c7, looking to trade these rooks, and then the advantage will be very clear there because I'll just be winning another pawn. So here, yeah, I'll just trade rooks. And he can't take it back because it would be checkmate right here. So good game. And let's take a look at, we're going to just take a quick look at the analysis board after this. Okay, let's look at a couple of the positions here from the game. And here, this is right out of the opening. And this is actually a theoretical position. And normally, black plays the two most popular moves are queen to c7, which helps to cover these dark squares, of course, and a6, which prevents like a knight to b5 here. And the idea is that after bishop to b4, one of the main moves, so one of the main moves is what I played, which was knight takes c6, followed by queen to d4. But the other main move is this knight to b5, with the same idea of getting the two bishops and having a lock on this d6 square. And both of those are viable alternatives and pretty good for white, looking at the statistics. So that was the first instructive point here, but for me at least, in the opening, is it is important to know your theory when you're not playing sort of normal developing moves, and it's always good to look up what the masters have played after your games. Okay, our second instructive position comes from the middle game. And here, I played this bishop to e4 with this intention of taking here, with the idea that even though it's bishops of opposite color, my bishop would be superior. And this line that the computer helped me find here uh, I thought was interesting. Here, F5 is played, and basically it's saying, here I looked at this, and if I took, I felt that this just gets black back into the game. And in fact, the computer assesses this as equal. Whereas if I take, thinking that these pawn weaknesses would be good for me, it actually a little different. Here, this is being threatened to trap my bishop, so I have to play f3. And then after a move like king to f7, followed by king to e6, this game is perfectly even. And in fact, with these queenside pawns, black can actually put some pressure on white in the endgame. So, as well as this pawn just being very weak and kind of locking down this bishop to its defense. So, I think that was black's chance to equalize the game. And of course, at this point, instead of f5, he played uh, knight to e7, which I think, as we saw in the game, gave me the slight edge. And finally, I want to look at what could be the critical mistake for black. Now, of course, black is, I think, worse off in this position already because of my positional edges. But he makes a critical mistake, which we spotted during the game, which was to play bishop takes b7, and we see that white just wins a pawn, and that capturing on e4 made it even worse because that f pawn restricts black's knight. So relatively better would have been to play something like knight to c6, blocking this off. Now here I think white gets a nice edge anyway with rook h to d1, and after king to c7, bolstering. Here we have this breakthrough move b4. And the idea behind this is that although it looks like white's going to win a pawn back, or I'm sorry, black's going to win a pawn back, we now have this simple move bishop to f2 with this deadly threat, which would break through the game. And of course, if the knight comes back to try to block, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, and here's the idea: is bishop takes b6 check, skewering this king and this rook. So we're going to win material here. And if other defenses don't quite work here either, if f5, we just take, and again, we still have these threats. And so any chances to try to block it, for example, here, and then we just have something like this. Bishop to g3, protecting this rook and threatening some deadly discovered attacks. So this, let's go back. This point was black's last chance to sort of, he'd be in a worse position, but at least a little more playable with a move like knight to c6 or king to c7 instead of the move he played in the game, which is bishop to b7. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you found it instructive. If you have any questions about the game, feel free to leave them down below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm going to be trying to put out content more regularly again, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you. Okay, have a great day and talk to you soon.